By the autumn of 1943, the 100th Bomb Group had earned a reputation that no unit wanted. They were called the Bloody Hundredth. Stationed at Thorpe Abbotts airfield in the flat farmlands of Norfolk, England, the young American airmen who filled its barracks, briefing rooms, and aircraft bays carried the weight of a deadly legacy. They were part of the 8th Air Force, the tip of the spear in the U.S. Army Air Force's strategy of daylight precision bombing over Nazi-occupied Europe. But the cost of that strategy was becoming unbearable. The theory, crafted by pre-war air power advocates back in Washington, was that formations of B-17 flying fortresses, flying in tight combat boxes and protected by overlapping fields of machine gun fire, could survive even the most hostile skies and strike key German industrial sites with surgical precision, all without the need for fighter escort deep into enemy territory. It was a theory that held strong in peacetime war colleges and ivory tower lectures. But the skies over Germany told a different story. Every mission stretched nerves taut. Crews knew the statistics, even if they didn't say them aloud. Odds of completing a 25-mission tour, the threshold for being rotated home, were slim. Flak, fighters, mechanical failure, sheer bad luck, all claimed men every day. Yet still they climbed into the bellies of their B-17s each morning, strapped into oxygen masks and flak jackets, and flew toward a wall of steel and fire. By October 1943, losses were mounting. Schweinfurt, Regensburg, Bremen, Kassel, names that echoed in the chow halls and briefing rooms like tombstones. And now, orders came in for Münster. Münster was a mid-sized city in northwestern Germany, rich in medieval history and scarred by war. It was also a vital communications and transportation hub for the German military, a spider's web of rail lines, repair yards, and command centers. Its destruction was intended to cripple Wehrmacht movements and undermine morale. But it sat well within the reach of the Luftwaffe's strongest fighter wings and bristled with anti-aircraft defenses. On October 10, 1943, the Bloody Hundredth took to the skies with 13 B-17 aircraft. Crews moved with the kind of quiet that only experience and fear can create. There was no bravado anymore, just routine. Load the bombs, check the guns, climb aboard, say nothing that might tempt fate. Engines roared to life in the misty dawn. The long procession of fortresses rumbled down the runway one by one, lifting into the gray English sky. Formation flying began over the channel, and soon the 100th joined the larger bomber stream. Hundreds of B-17s spread across the sky in wave after wave of silver predators heading east. But the predators were also prey. As they crossed into enemy airspace, the radio crackled with early contact reports. The Luftwaffe was ready. FW-190S and Bf-109S, flown by seasoned German aces, rose to meet them with deadly precision. First, they shadowed the formation, gauging weaknesses. Then they struck. Wave after wave of fighters slashed through the bomber stream. They dove head-on, guns blazing, then peeled away and came around again. The flying fortresses, for all their machine guns and armor, were flying bricks. One good burst to the cockpit, a hit to a fuel tank, a fire in the wing, and they were gone. And on this day, the 100th Bomb Group bore the brunt of the onslaught. One by one, the flying fortresses began to fall. A B-17 nicknamed Argo took a direct hit to its nose section. It nosed down violently, spinning into the clouds, no chutes seen. Stymie, another fortress, was set ablaze by cannon fire. It limped along for a few more miles before breaking apart mid-air. Shackrat was last seen with 2 engines out, trailing smoke, slowly losing altitude as fighters swarmed like hornets. Sweater Girl vanished from formation after a direct hit to the bomb bay. The detonation of its own payload turned it into a fiery comet. Inside the remaining aircraft, chaos reigned. Gunners screamed over intercoms. Flak bursts shook the aluminum airframes, blood-soaked flight decks, oxygen masks dangled uselessly from dead faces. Waist gunners fired until their barrels glowed red, trying to hold back the tide. The formation disintegrated. Mutual protection vanished. Each fortress became an isolated target. By the time the group neared Münster, there were barely any aircraft left to strike the target. But they did. What few bombers remained in the 100th's formation released their payloads on the city, shaking the earth and filling the air with smoke and debris. Fires raged below, but the cost was staggering. On the return trip, more bombers fell. Of the 13 B-17s that left Thorpe Abbotts that morning, only one, Rosie's Riveters, piloted by Lieutenant Robert Rosenthal, made it back. The image of that lone fortress returning home has become the stuff of legend. Bullet holes riddled its fuselage. One engine was gone. The tail was shredded. Half the crew was wounded, but it flew. Somehow, it flew. As Rosie's Riveters limped back across the channel and touched down on English soil, the surviving ground crews could scarcely believe their eyes. 12 of 13 B-17 lost. More than 100 airmen gone, killed, captured, or simply vanished. It was the worst single-day loss for the 100th Bomb Group during the entire war. The Bloody Hundredth had lived up to its name once again, in the most tragic way imaginable. From that day on, the 100th carried a weight unlike any other. Their nickname, once whispered in dark humor, became a mark of grim reverence. They had walked through fire and watched their brothers fall. And still, the missions kept coming. Still, the war pressed on. But October 10th, 1943, would never be forgotten. Not in Thorpe Abbotts, not in the annals of the 8th Air Force, and not in the hearts of those who flew with the Bloody Hundredth. The target that day was Münster, a city that did not carry the same ominous weight as Berlin or Hamburg, but one that pulsed with military significance deep within the German war machine. Nestled in northwestern Germany, Münster served as a vital artery in the Reich's network of railways and communications, a logistical nerve center that funneled troops, equipment, and fuel to both the eastern and western fronts. For Allied planners, its destruction promised to throttle the Wehrmacht's ability to respond quickly to battlefield demands. For the men of the 100th Bomb Group, it was simply the next name on the map. Another city, another mission, another day to survive. The orders were clear. On the morning of October 10, 1943, 13 U.S. bomb groups were slated to rise from their English airfields and strike the city with overwhelming force. Hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses would converge in a coordinated assault, saturating Münster's rail yards, command posts, and marshalling yards in a storm of high explosives. The scale of the attack would overwhelm enemy defenses. That was the plan. But reality had other ideas. Even before the sun had fully risen over the wet gray fields of East Anglia, complications began to unfold. Fog clung to the runways. Mechanical issues grounded aircraft. Confusion in communications caused delays, reroutes, and finally, withdrawals. Entire groups scrubbed their missions. Some never got off the ground. Others turned back mid-flight, their formations scattered, fragmented by weather and garbled radio instructions. But one group continued. The 100th Bomb Group, the Bloody Hundredth, lifted off from Thorpe Abbotts, climbed to altitude, and turned east over the North Sea, unaware that they were now nearly alone. From the pilot's seats and bombardiers' compartments, no one could see the absence behind them. In the air, formations seemed full. The sky was still filled with the silver glint of wings. Only later, when check-ins went unanswered and supporting elements failed to arrive, would the weight of isolation begin to sink in. They pressed forward into enemy territory, guided by dead reckoning, practiced habit, and a grim sense of duty. The morning sun now caught the vapor trails of their engines, stretching white across the sky like the chalk lines of fate. Below them, the green fields of the Low Countries gave way to the darker sprawl of the German heartland. And still they flew. Radio silence masked the growing concern among the crews. The lead navigator noted missing groups. The formation leaders double-checked routes. But the mission clock ticked on, and orders were orders. Münster lay ahead, and the Bloody Hundredth would not turn back. For the Luftwaffe, this development was a gift. Reconnaissance and radar reports made clear that one formation, alone, unsupported, was continuing toward the target. No escort, no second wave, no reinforcements. Just a single group of bombers stretched across the sky like sitting ducks. German fighter controllers reacted swiftly. From bases near Rhein, Gelsenkirchen, and Paderborn, FW-190s and BF-109s scrambled into the air, directed by ground controllers with ruthless efficiency. They would not need to divide their efforts. All focus would be on these dozen bombers. As the bombers neared the target area, resistance began to stiffen. The radio crackled with sightings, fighters on the horizon, flak ahead. Still, the group pressed on, unaware that they were no longer part of a massive assault, but the sole instrument of an aborted plan. The usual strength in numbers doctrine that had protected earlier missions had evaporated. 13 bombers were flying directly into the heart of a city prepared for a full-on air raid, but now defended against a single isolated group. Inside each fortress, the atmosphere tightened. Eyes scanned the skies for enemy fighters. Waist gunners braced behind their twin 50-caliber mounts. Navigators clutched their maps. Bombardiers adjusted their Norden sights. The mission, already off balance from the start, now moved toward the edge of disaster. Below, the city of Münster began to stir. Sirens wailed. Barrage balloons rose. Flak batteries snapped into action, their barrels tilting skyward. The Luftwaffe's trap was nearly complete. But the men of the 100th did not know this. They flew their route, climbed to bombing altitude, and prepared to release their payloads over the rail yards and switching stations that crisscrossed the city. But the storm was already upon them. Flak began to burst in thick black clouds, punctuating the sky like bruises. Concussions rattled airframes. Shrapnel pinged against aluminum skin. Some planes took hits and wobbled, dropping out of formation. That was when the fighters came, dozens of them, slicing through the sky with the fury of vengeance. Their attacks were coordinated, precise, and merciless. Head-on passes, slashing rear assaults, quick dives, then climbs for another strike. And all the while, the 100th Bomb Group, now the only bomb group, fought to hold formation, to stay on course, to complete the mission. In that chaos, as planes began to fall, as intercoms screamed and oxygen lines were cut and blood painted the decks, the full reality of the situation sank in. There would be no reinforcements, no overlapping formations, no wingmen to cover their flanks. They were alone, but still they dropped their bombs. They released them on target, through flak, through fire, through a sky turned into a killing field. And then they turned for home, or what was left of it. The return leg was a gauntlet. More fighters followed. Flak continued to dog their path, and the casualties mounted. One after another, B-17s fell away. Some exploded in mid-air. Others limped on fire into a final dive. Some crews bailed out over enemy territory. Some never got the chance. And all the while, the rest of the 8th Air Force, grounded or redirected, could only listen. When the day ended and the bombers failed to return, when only one lonely fortress touched down again at Thorpe Abbotts, engines coughing, tail shredded, wings shot to ribbons, the ground crews understood. The Bloody Hundredth had flown alone into Münster, and they had paid the price. 13 B-17s lifted into the gray English morning from Thorpe Abbotts, their engines rumbling like distant thunder across the countryside. They were a sight to behold. Long, gleaming lines of silver wings and gun turrets, each flying fortress loaded with 10-man crews and a mission etched into the very steel of their fuselages. Every man aboard knew his place. Every gun was manned. Every bomb bay was full. These weren't just planes. They were mobile citadels of aluminum and firepower, each bristling with up to 13 50-caliber machine guns. Defensive might was their creed. Formation flying was their shield. It was drilled into them. Tight formations brought mutual defense, overlapping arcs of fire, coordinated movement. Alone, a B-17 was vulnerable. Together, they were supposed to be invincible. The 100th Bomb Group had done this before, missions over France, over Bremen, über Regensburg. But this morning was different. The air held a kind of stillness, as if history were waiting to exhale. Somewhere ahead, Münster awaited, a target important enough to risk lives for, a place marked on charts not by beauty or culture but by rail junctions and fuel depots. The path to it was known, measured in compass headings, checkpoints, and altitudes. They had their orders, their fuel, their payloads. Now all that remained was to fly into the fire and hope to come out the other side. As they crossed the Dutch coastline and the flat green earth of the Netherlands unrolled beneath them, the tension inside the bombers grew tighter. Conversations over the intercom grew more clipped. Waist gunners scanned the skies, the top turret swung in slow, constant arcs, and the ball turret spun below like an eye in the underworld. Men who moments ago joked on the ground now sat quietly, eyes fixed on altimeters, oxygen gauges, and the dull sheen of incoming flak. The first signs came as tiny black blossoms in the sky, flak. Puffs of angry smoke that erupted suddenly and vanished just as fast, but each one carried metal teeth. They drifted in at first, scattered and ineffective, but soon they grew thicker, closer, more precise. Over the Netherlands, the Luftwaffe's flak batteries had been trained well. Some fortresses began to tremble under the shock of near misses. One bomber lost an engine, feathered the propeller but kept formation. In another, a gunner shouted over the comms that they'd taken a hole in the tail. No one hurt. Minor damage, nothing to break them yet. They pressed forward. Below, towns slid past like dioramas. Civilians pointed skyward. Others ran for cover. Every man aboard those bombers knew the stakes. Once they crossed into Germany proper, there would be no turning back. It was enemy country now. The sky was theirs to win or lose. Then, on the horizon, movement, a glint of sunlight, a flicker against the cloud line. Someone yelled into the intercom, "Bandits, 11 o'clock high." That single shout turned every head, every gun. German fighters had arrived. The Luftwaffe did not come timidly. Focke-Wulf Fu-19s in tight formation appeared like phantoms, sweeping in with the cold confidence of hunters. Behind them, Messerschmitt Bf-109s climbed from the clouds, engines screaming. They were not probing. They were not testing the bombers' defenses. They attacked in mass, using head-on tactics, raking the B-17s with cannon fire before braking hard to avoid the hail of American machine gun fire. Their discipline was brutal. Their aim was precise. They dove, fired, disappeared, and returned again from another angle. The American gunners fought back with everything they had. Tracer rounds lit the sky like meteors, dancing across the air in arcs of orange fire. Waist gunners shouted enemy positions. Top turret gunners screamed kill confirmations. A gunner cheered as a fighter spun away trailing smoke. Another cursed as a friend's gun went silent, then called back too late that he was hit. The formation held, barely. Gaps opened where bombers had gone down. Fires burned in engines. Some bombers dropped their bombs early to lighten the load and limp on. Others, proud, defiant, stayed on target, fighting through the chaos to deliver their payloads on Münster. One by one, the bombers were picked off. The tail end of the formation suffered the worst. They were always the most vulnerable. Fighters cut through the rear, focusing their fire with surgical cruelty. One B-17 struck in the wing root, rolled onto its side and plunged earthward in flames. No chutes. Another exploded mid-air, a bright, terrible blossom of fire that sent shrapnel across the sky. Radio calls grew frantic, jumbled, then cut off entirely. In one fortress, the pilot fought to hold the yoke steady as his co-pilot bled out beside him. In another, a waist gunner was thrown to the floor by an exploding cannon shell, dragging himself back to his gun, face covered in blood, refusing to leave his post. In the nose of yet another, the bombardier leaned into his scope, flak cracking all around, hands steady as stone as he guided his payload to the rail yard below. Bombs fell. Not all of them hit, but enough. The target was struck. Fires spread across the train yards, across barracks and storage depots. Münster had been hit, but at a terrible cost. The return flight was worse. Now broken, scattered, leaking fuel and blood, the survivors turned west. Some had lost engines, some had lost men, some had lost hope. But they flew. More fighters came. The Luftwaffe was relentless, unwilling to let the prey escape. The flak picked up again near the coast, finishing what the fighters had started. Another fortress went down over the Netherlands, smoking and spiraling. A few made it to the Channel, a few beyond that, but not many. By the end of the day, Thorpe Abbotts was quiet. Ground crews stared at the sky. Radio operators listened to static. Out of the 13 bombers that had taken off that morning, only one limped home. It came in low, one engine dead, tail riddled with holes, its landing gear barely functioning. It rolled to a stop on the runway like a ghost, carrying the wounded remnants of a mission that had become a massacre. The Bloody Hundredth had flown into Münster alone, and they had paid in full. The sky over northwestern Germany turned into a killing field. More than 200 German fighters fell upon the 100th bomb group like a tidal wave of steel and fire. Focke-Wulfe FU-19s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s poured in from every quadrant, above, below, head-on, from behind, in a coordinated fury that left no avenue untouched. They came in waves, some diving steep from high altitude, others climbing to strike the bellies of the flying fortresses. Each one was a spear point in a carefully rehearsed slaughter. The German pilots knew this game, and they played it with the cold precision of men who had fought and killed in these skies for years. The 100th flew alone. Their 13 B-17s, once formidable in formation, now resembled an isolated herd surrounded by a pack of predators. The air turned into a swirling cauldron of smoke, flame, and shattered aluminum. Machine gun tracers slashed through the sky like glowing whips, red and orange threads weaving an apocalyptic tapestry. Flak bursts peppered the clouds in the distance, but it was the fighters who struck fear that morning, diving fast, firing cannons, then rolling and disappearing before a gunner could swing his turret around. Inside the bombers, chaos reigned. Waist gunners screamed out bearings. 6 o'clock low! 3 high, coming in hot! As they raked the skies with streams of 50 caliber fire. The ball turrets spun constantly, hunting for targets. Tail gunners tracked the wolves. The bomb run. Against all odds, a handful of B-17s reached Münster. Through the haze of battle and smoke, they opened their bomb bay doors and dropped their deadly payloads over the city's marshalling yards and rail lines. Explosions rocked the ground below, buildings collapsed, trains derailed. Civilians ran for cover as the city was engulfed in fire and debris, but there was no time to confirm the damage. The bombers turned for home, battered and bleeding, knowing they would face more fighters on the way out. The long road back. As the surviving B-17 limped westward, the Luftwaffe continued its assault. Fuel tanks leaked, engines sputtered, wings were riddled with holes. Only one aircraft, named Rosie's Riveters, made it all the way back to Thorpe Abbotts. Another managed to land in Belgium with a severely wounded crew. Of the 13 bombers that departed that morning, only one returned to base. 10 were shot down in combat. One crash-landed in Allied territory. Another was so badly damaged it was scrapped after landing. It was the costliest mission in the history of the 100th Bomb Group courage in the face of death. The airmen of the 100th Bomb Group faced hell that day and fought with staggering bravery. Crewmen kept manning their guns even after being wounded. Pilots held burning aircraft steady long enough for their comrades to bail out. Medics treated the wounded in mid-air. Radio operators sent final transmissions even as fire engulfed the fuselage. They were all volunteers, many barely 20 years old, and they paid the ultimate price. Aftermath and legacy news of the disaster spread quickly through Thorpe Abbotts. Hangars stood empty, beds went unused, friends were gone. The mission to Münster became legend, not for its success, but for the sheer sacrifice. The 100th Bomb Group would go on to fly many more missions in the war, but Münster became a turning point. From that day on, they were known with reverence and sorrow as the Bloody Hundredth. Their story was later immortalized in books, documentaries, and the TV series Masters of the Air. A monument in the sky today. The names of those lost on October 10, 1943, are engraved in stone memorials in England and the U.S., but their real monument is in the skies above Europe, where they gave everything in the battle for freedom. The mission over Münster reminds us of the terrifying cost of war, the courage of young airmen, and the resilience of those who fought despite the odds. The Bloody Hundredth may have been nearly wiped out, but they were never defeated. End of narrative.